Hello. In this presentation, you will hear about how GitHub projects respond to suddenly increased attention from the community. I'm Danaja Maldeniya, a PhD student at the University of Michigan School of Information. This work was done in collaboration with Ceren Budak, Lionel Robert, and Daniel Romero. Collaborative crowds like open source projects on GitHub and content production systems like Wikipedia are now established mechanisms of producing value in the modern information economy. However, they are a recent phenomenon compared to traditional organizations. So, how are collaborative crowds different from traditional organizations? For one, traditional organizations have a well defined boundary and structure. On the other hand, crowds are loosely knit groups of people interacting as the need arises. Second, organizations have formal roles and routines for their employees. Crowd contributors, on the other hand, take on roles and perform different routines dynamically. Third, organizations pay employees for their work. In contrast, often people in crowd collaborations contribute due to non-monetary reasons, things like reputation, reciprocity, and self-image. So, what do these differences between organizations and crowds mean for how crowds behave under different circumstances? For example, both organizations and crowds often experience unforeseen circumstances. And we know a lot about how organizations handle surprises, but we know less about how crowds do it. And that is the broad research question that we hope to address. So, why is this important? Because, like with organizations, if we understood how crowds respond to shocks and the resulting outcomes, one, we can help these crowds prepare for shocks better. Two, platform builders can design crowd platforms in a way that helps crowds make the most of these kinds of shocks. In this study, we focus on how members of a GitHub project, as well as the larger contributor community, will change their behavior when the project goes trending. The rest of the presentation will have the following order. First, I will discuss our hypothesis development process. Next, I will provide a quick introduction into the GitHub production workflow. I will follow this up with a description of how we selected a set of attention shocks from projects going trending on GitHub. Then I will introduce our methodological framework that addresses how shocks affect different aspects of project behavior. And finally, I will finish with our main findings and a discussion of the implications. Let's move on to the hypotheses. Our hypotheses were inspired by two main domains in the literature: organizational theory and empirical studies of crowds. With organizational theory, we use the lens of organizational change. This explores how organizations change over time due to internal and external processes. Specifically, we drew our inspiration from studies of rapidly growing small organizations. And the rationale for this was twofold. One, most GitHub projects only have a small number of contributors, and the size and popularity of these projects have a long tail distribution. When projects trend, they are likely to expand rapidly. Second, in GitHub projects, contributors fall into two categories: members that can edit the contents, and outsiders whose work needs to be approved by the members. And we see this dichotomy as being similar to that of managers and line employees in traditional organizations. We also looked at empirical work on crowds to understand how these organizational theories could be adapted to the crowd context. In particular, we looked at how people contributed and coordinated on GitHub, and how these behaviors led to different levels of performance. We also looked at prior literature on how shocks affected crowd settings, and most of these happen to be on Wikipedia. Based on this framework, we came up with four high-level hypotheses. The first is that trending will increase attention on the project, and this will lead to a growth in the number of contributors and the amount of work done. And this follows naturally from prior literature, which suggests that trending increases project visibility substantially, and that people use the trending page to find projects to contribute to. In rapidly growing small organizations, the original employees are suddenly faced with onboarding many new employees, and this strains their capacity. We think the same will happen with GitHub projects, and that this will lead to backlogs. Extending this logic, in growing organizations, or the original employees transition into managerial roles. And we think we'll see the same thing in GitHub projects that go trending. Finally, based on the sudden increased external engagement and the transition of the core team into administrative roles, we expect to see these projects becoming more open to outsiders. And given the growth in the workforce, we also expect that in order to improve coordination, small work groups will start forming. Next, I will quickly summarize the core GitHub workflow. When a user creates a project, they become the owner and the first member. The main container for the contents of the project is known as the main branch, and only the members can edit the content of the main branch. Any user, either member or an outsider, can create an issue in any GitHub project. And it can be about anything from a bug, a feature request, to a general query on how the software works. And again, anybody can participate in the ensuing discussion. Now, if an outsider wants to contribute to the project, they must first copy the project. And this is called forking. And they can then edit the copy. And once they've done something on the copy that they want to give back to the original project, they can bundle these changes into what is called a pull request. And you can submit this pull request to the original project. People, outsiders, members can discuss the merits of the PR, and in the end, the members have to either choose to approve or reject the pull request. If the members approve it, then the changes are added to the project. And this is called a merge. Next, I will describe how we selected the set of shocks that we studied. We chose our shocks from cases of projects appearing on the GitHub trending page. And GitHub chooses these projects based on recent popularity or activity. And they update the page every 3 hours. And the page itself contains one list for the entire platform, as well as separate programming language specific lists. As you can see on the figure on the left, people can start a project directly from the page. And starting is a way of showing approval as well as a way to save the project for later reference. Additionally, the list contains information about how many stars and copies have been made from the project, as well as a set of the leading developers. To see if trending does indeed lead to an increase in the attention on a project, we looked at the time series of the number of stars and forks. And we can see here that both increase with trending and then gradually decay. Another interesting thing to note is that projects get more attention the higher they climb up the list. So in order to select our shocks, we start with all trending events over a 7-month period. Due to the less censoring in the trend data we scraped, we remove the events from the first 2 weeks. In order to focus on particularly strong cases of attention shocks, we limited our analysis to only those appearing in the top 5 of any list. And among the resulting set of events, we had cases where a project would go instantaneously trending with no prior activity data. These turned out to be mature projects that had just been open sourced. And because we didn't have any pre-trending data to compare with, we removed these from the analysis as well. We end up with about 1,100 shocks. And each shock is represented by a project, a date, and a corresponding programming language. Now, I said before that these figures show that trending increases attention. there's a problem. And the problem is that these projects were demonstrating already increasing attention and popularity before trending. And this is clear if you look at the time immediately before trending in the figures. So any changes in behavior we see after trending may be due to a combination of trending and the preceding natural growth. To untangle this problem and identify the effect of trending on the behaviors, we use a causal inference framework. And our approach has two parts. First, we use propensity score matching to identify a set of non-trending projects and dates that can account for the pre-trending growth of the selected shock. Next, we use difference in difference regression with the combined data set of shocks and controls to estimate the effects of trending on different behaviors. To use propensity score matching, we need to know what makes a project trend. And based on our research, we know that GitHub uses stars and forks and how they're changing over time to do this. Based on this, first we estimate the likelihood of any active project during our study period trending on a given date. And then we find a list of non-trending projects and dates that are nearest neighbors to our shocks, using the propensity and covariate similarity. Then we stratify the combined dataset of shocks and controls by propensity to further reduce differences between compared shocks and controls. And finally, we refine this process till we are satisfied that shocks and controls in each block are adequately similar to account for pre-trending growth. Once we have appropriate controls, we use difference in difference to estimate the effect of the trending behaviors. We measure each behavior once before and once after for trending and for control projects. In the figure that you see here, the trending measurements are shown in green and the controls are in blue. And the difference in difference model assumes that in the absence of trending, that the trends in behavior of the treated and control projects are parallel. And this gives us a counterfactual for the trending projects for had they not trended. The difference between this counterfactual and the actually observed behavior after trending is the estimated effect of trending on that behavioral outcome. And now we come to the findings. We consider the first hypothesis of growth in terms of two sub-hypotheses. One, that the community interest will increase as a result of trending, and that so will external contributions. Now in the figure, the blue bars you see are the effect of trending as a percentage change. The red bars are the same effect, but now also controlling for pre-trending growth. We can clearly see that external attention has increased. After trending, projects receive more stars and more forks. And this effect is even more substantial compared to the controls. So the controls are regressing to the baseline after prior growth. We see similar trends in terms of contributions as well. We see that there are more contributors and more external pull requests and issues being opened. And again, there's a substantial increase when we compare with respect to the controls. But there's a catch. And that is that the average number of files edited by outsiders has decreased. And this holds to a lesser extent even when we consider in comparison to the controls. So one explanation for this phenomena is that most newcomers are only making relatively trivial contributions, like say for example, changes to documentation. In our second hypothesis, we said that the trade of coordinating more newcomers will lead to backlogs from the members. We see mixed signals for this. One, we see that members are in fact taking much longer to respond to outsiders than before. But when we look at how fast they close items opened by outsiders, we don't really see a difference from before. And this might be also because the contributions or items opened by outsiders are relatively trivial. Because there are so many items, the members take longer to get to them on average, increasing the response delay, but they do close a lot of them. Next, we looked at if the members are becoming more administrative oriented. We looked at this in terms of two sub-hypotheses. One, whether they engage with outsiders more, and two, as a result, did they do direct production less? You see clear evidence of this. You clearly see that one, they are engaging with outsiders more. They're closing more issues and more pull requests. And as expected, this seems to be eating into their development time. They're doing way less pushers and pull requests, and the total number of lines of content they added have decreased. Given the further large decline compared to the controls, it seems like members in the trending projects are decreasing their activity, whereas members in the control projects are actually doing more development work. To look at the overall coordination, we use distributed leadership theory by Gron, and we adapt his arguments to our context. One, we expect members will collaborate with outsiders more. Two, we think that as a result of this openness, outsiders will become more important within the project as well. Three, given the increased size of the workforce, we think that small work groups will form that will improve coordination. And finally, we think that members may try to automate certain methods to enforce quality and values with the mass of newcomers. So first we look at whether members are increasingly engaging with outsiders. Now we do see that they are approving more pull requests from outsiders, but it's not really significant with respect to the controls. So this is probably due to a natural growth rather than the shock. But on average, it is clear that members are engaging with more items by outsiders compared to the controls. So as a result of this engagement, do we see outsiders becoming more important? We see mostly positive evidence for this. We see that more outsiders are becoming high volume file editors. But one catch is that we don't see them necessarily becoming more central to the collaboration. So they're doing more in terms of file editing, but they seem to be doing that in relative isolation. On the other hand, with issue and pull request discussion, we see clear evidence that outsiders are becoming more central. And the difference between editing files and pull request and issue discussions may be that editing files, which actually entails coding, takes more commitment and knowledge compared to discussing PRs and issues. Next, we look at the argument that we will see more decentralized collaboration. We only see partial support for this. First, we don't see this with collaboration surrounding files and PRs at all. But we do see some moderate evidence of work groups forming in issue discussions. And again, we think that this may be due to the relative complexities associated with files, PRs, and issues. Issues are the easiest artifacts to engage with, whereas pull requests are harder and files are even harder. Finally, we see very mixed results for automation among the projects that trended. We do see some increase in the likelihood of using automation, but not in comparison to the controls. So this is a response to natural growth and not to trending. Two, with the number of automated tasks, we see counterintuitive results. The number decreases after trending. And we think that this might have something to do with release cycles. Projects tend to use a lot of automation to test the projects before releases. And there is a possibility that a release makes trending more likely. Case. So in summary, our findings show that projects grow substantially after trending. But most of the newcomers may only be making relatively shallow contributions. Still, due to the sheer size of engagement, the core team is going to have trouble. But on a positive note, members will open up the project to outsiders and they will take on more responsibility. So what do these findings mean for GitHub projects that trend? One, trying to deal with a lot of shallow engagements directly may not be the best use of members' time. Maybe use a job board, to direct outsiders to easy but useful tasks and not take up their time in the process. Two, if the members are not going to be able to stay responsive, they might lose potentially committed contributors to other projects. Solutions might be automated boilerplate responses that might buy them some time. They might also want to scan and prioritize items based on how promising an outside contributor looks like. Finally, when a team grows this fast, it's hard to maintain quality and group values. Clear guidelines on contributing and some automated enforcement, we think, should help with that. Finally, based on these observations, as next steps, we hope to look at how these changes in behavior might actually affect future performance of projects. Thank you for listening. I will now answer questions.